Hello and welcome. Welcome to Alta Live. This is the digital event series we do at Alta Journal. It's wine o'clock at 12:30 Pacific Standard Time today. If you're here for a conversation about natural wine, you are absolutely in the right place. So welcome to Alta Live. Today's guests are wine distributor Roni Ginach and Alta Journal contributor Sydney Love, who will be in conversation with Alta's editor-at-large and, as we were just discussing, resident Angelino. Roni is a former sommelier and restaurant consultant. She's founded Roni Selects in 2017. Her company imports amazing natural wine from all over the world and distributes it across the country. She was part of an Alta feature story on natural wine that was written by LA-based wine writer and Alta contributor Sydney Love. Roni and Sydney will explain natural wine and define it. We've gotten some emails very specifically asking how one defines natural wine, so we're going to get the answer to that. We're going to discuss its growing popularity. Hopefully they will offer some tips for holiday drinking and gift giving. And again, this will be in conversation with Alta's editor-at-large, Mary Melton. Before they begin, some brief housekeeping. Again, Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. My name's Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor. If you are unfamiliar with our quarterly magazine, we are an award-winning quarterly. We have all sorts of events like this, including a California book club. In fact, tomorrow night, we will be welcoming Hector Tobar for a conversation on his book. So if you like what we do here today, I so hope you will check us out at altaonline.com. There is a Q&A button underneath our video for you to ask questions. Mary, Roni, and Sydney will chat for about 30 minutes, and then we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today, and we will send you an email, not only with that link, but also with links to all sorts of things that we've discussed today. Wines, Sydney's article, Roni's website, all sorts of cool stuff like that. So if you wouldn't mind by kicking off the chat and letting us know where you're zooming in from. It's nice to see where our crowd is located geographically. I'm up here in Marin County in Novato, California. I will let our panelists and hosts take it from here, and I will see you again at the end.
Thank you so much, Beth, for the intro, and I'm so pleased to be here. And let's kick it off in that spirit. Roni, where are you zooming in from today?
I am in Los Angeles, sunny Los Angeles, California.
Okay, great. I think we're neighbors. You're in Northeast LA?
It's true. Yeah, I think we're very close to each other in Highland Park around the corner. Great.
I am in Eagle Rock, right here for 20 plus years now. And Sydney, where are you?
I'm also in Los Angeles today. I'm based in K-Town, so Koreatown, but I won't be here for much longer. I'll be going up to the Bay Area very soon, early New Year.
Okay, well, this is a rare moment for us to have three Angelinos on the Alta call. So I'm really happy to be talking to both of you today. And I do think, to Beth's point, you know, this session today is inspired by a wonderful story that Sydney wrote in our current issue that looks at the genesis of natural wine on the West Coast and how so much of the growth and the rise in natural wine can be attributed to a group of really powerful, amazing LA women who have championed it. But I do think it's really helpful. And this was a question I had for Sydney when I was editing this piece, because I was fuzzy on it and I drink a little bit of wine, for us just to define what we even mean by natural wine, because my understanding is there are some gray areas there. And I just would love to know, if someone comes in and asks you, what is natural wine? What is your response? Either one of you can take that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to tag team this definition with Roni, because I think everyone has their own personal definition. Mm-hmm. So something I usually start off with when I interview someone about natural wine, I ask them how they define that. So Roni, for your company, how do you define natural wine?
Sure. I think you actually did ask me this question as the first question when you interviewed me. I'm sure I'll give a different answer than I did then. For my purposes, and you know, the ambiguity is because there is no actual someone just posted a link to Raw Wine's definition of natural wine, which is one particular interpretation. Basically, the baseline is wine made without the use of synthetics or chemicals, no fertilizers, no pesticides, herbicides in the vineyard, and during the winemaking process, it has to be fermented wild, which means that there's no additional, no conventional yeast, or sorry, not conventional, no commercial yeast added to trigger the fermentation. So it's what's called a natural fermentation or indigenous fermentation. And that's the baseline. There's a lot of, that is in response to the fact that there isn't regulation in wine in terms of what you can add, really. There are, in any conventional wine, there are up to like 250 different chemicals, like just, there could be like formaldehyde, there like any kind of acid, sugar, tons of additions. So the baseline of natural wine is just like, we make wine without all that stuff. And then there's a question of, once you get deeper into it, there's a question of sulfur or fining and filtering. And those are sort of more technical questions, but the baseline is no chemicals, indigenous yeast. That's it for me, at least. I don't know, Sydney, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have a similar definition. First and foremost, the grapes have to be grown organically. So that's the first step. And then anywhere from there, it's about, not adding or removing anything to the wine. There's also the different farming techniques that we kind of associate with natural wine. And I would love to talk about, how natural wine tastes. I think there's some misconceptions about what natural wine is, because it is kind of this huge umbrella term, and it can mean how the wine was grown, how the wine was made, how the wine tastes. So yeah, I mean, for me, I try to hone in on the farming aspects, because that's really how the wine was grown and made.
You describe it, if my memory is correct, Sydney, as wine without makeup, which I thought was a really quick way for understanding what we're talking about. There is, I think, some confusion, though, when you bring up the organic farming aspect of it, between organic and biodynamic and natural labels. I'm curious if there's conversation going around about if there's an easy way for consumers to understand the difference between it, and does it matter?
Yeah, so I'd also love to hear Roni's thoughts on this. For me personally, I don't think it matters unless you're really into farming, really.
Mm-hmm.
So first and foremost, again, organic is key. And then biodynamics is kind of the second tier of farming. So biodynamics, of course, would include organic farming. And then it also includes growing your vines based on the lunar cycle and the seasons, and it's all about the practice of how you farm those grapes. Yeah, any thoughts, Roni?
Sure, yeah. I think, it gets kind of complicated because organic is a baseline. There are also regulating bodies for organic certification and biodynamic certification that can be sort of cost prohibitive for some farmers who are working on a small scale. Organic farming practices include often the use of copper and sulfur in the vines, which are fine, but a buildup of copper is like a hard metal. So there are nuances, not to get into the details of the nuances between each thing, but thinking about baseline organics as a baseline, and then everything else on top of it, we kind of like, people will get certified, and then you can be sure that they're farming well. A lot of people don't get certified because they don't necessarily, these are all political organizations, the organic certifying body and depending on what the country is. So it's all, there are a lot of punks in the natural wine scene that are just like, I'm not signing up for anything. You know what I mean? I do what I'm going to do. And they have like a little anarchy symbol on their label, and they're just like, that kind of vibe. But
is there really an anarchy symbol on the labels?
Some people, I work with one producer who just like, yeah. who has some, like a lot of skulls, and you know what I mean? It's just like they listen to metal, it's a side note. But the point is that there are also people who are working in terms of like, now I went on a recent visit to see some producers in Europe, and there are a bunch of people thinking even more extremely about permaculture, or sort of like permaculture plus, creating holistic ecosystems that are sort of like generating biodiversity around, like above ground and below ground. So it's, people can get very extreme in terms of thinking, and sort of, and like very inspiring, and it's cool to see what's going on now that the natural wine movement has kind of like organic as a baseline, and then what else is possible, thinking about sort of the future.
Are people looking toward California and us as for inspiration with this as well?
Yes, and I think there are some people doing wonderful work here in terms of farming, and there historically have been. It's also difficult, obviously. California is, as we know, a huge industrial agriculture hub. So there, and it depends on sort of where you are in the state. In more remote areas, it's easier to control the farming. I know, like in the, let's take the Santa Ynez Valley, for example. There are large plots where many people source from different vineyards, like Camp 4, let's say. And there are parts of it that are farmed organically. And then there are other parts of it, it's like sort of the same model as Burgundy. You source from different vineyards, and sort of you control your plot. So there's runoff, and it's, the thing that I will say, the difference between organic, like when you call something organic or biodynamic, and then you use the term natural, natural implies you can farm biodynamically and farm organically and still put a bunch of stuff in the wine once you get to the winery. So to use the term natural implies that you're signing up for the whole package, that you have to farm at least organically, and that you're not going to put anything in the wine once it gets to the,
right.
You're going to let it be what it's going to be,
Right. And Sydney, as you outline in the story, this is something that's on the rise, on the West Coast in particular, and that LA surprisingly has been a dominant force in encouraging that. So for a lot of our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with the LA wine landscape, you pinpoint this in particular to Domain LA. Can you tell us what Domain LA is and why you think that was the launching pad for this?
Yeah, so Domain LA was started by a woman named Jill Bernheimer, and the wine shop is based in Hollywood. She started it back in 2009, and it became a hub in that she was one of the first wine shops to really focus on natural wines specifically. And a bunch of people in the industry who then wanted to learn about natural wine spent time working there. And then they went off and started their own businesses. So it's been a place where people have been able to explore natural wine, taste it, learn about it. And they have a really impressive selection of wines there that you can, that all I would consider as natural wines.
And Roni, you're an alum of Domain LA, yes?
I mean, case in point, it was my first job when I moved to LA, holiday packing. I mean, Jill, who owns the shop, was thinking about coming, but to be on this panel, which would have been wonderful, but also it's holiday season. And when I was hired, it was as like a holiday wine packer. And I was like, there's no way she's going to make it. She's in the weeds. Anyway, I started there, and,
what was the appeal of it? Like, what did you think when you first walked in there? What did it seem like a special place?
Yeah, Jill, there, at the time, also there really wasn't another, there were so few people working in natural wine at that moment. And so I wanted to learn about it. I'd come from working as a somm in New York, not within the context of natural wine. And so I knew that this was like, ideologically, I was just like, this is the direction I'm going to go in, because like, this is aligned with my values. There wasn't really a question. I was just like, this is my field within the wine industry. And so, yeah, I mean, Jill was doing this thing that nobody else was doing. There had been one other, Lou, who has a shop now, had a restaurant and was like in between spaces at the time. And so, yeah, Jill was kind of like the hub. And so that job, I like kind of met everybody at, you know what I mean? I met all the reps and who were still working, some people who are the people who I still consider my family, you know, in terms of wine. I met there, you know, within the first 6 months of being in Los Angeles.
And what year was this for you?
2014.
Right. So this is all happening in a very short window when you really think about it, this rise, and especially when, as you say in the story, Sydney, we've had at least half a dozen natural wine shops open in LA during the pandemic over the course of just the last 18 to 24 months. And I think you're representing one of them, perhaps with your t-shirt. I visited Heaven's Market in Chinatown a couple of weeks ago, which is one of the new stores. Two questions. I'm really curious why women in particular have been such a force in this, and then why LA in particular, maybe even beyond Domaine. Like, is it unique to LA, this concentration of natural wine shops, and what do you think has drawn so many women into what has traditionally been kind of a staid, more male-dominated field, right? Wine in general is it's both exciting new developments, but what do you think is behind that?
Well, I really tried to pinpoint this in the story and find a conclusion, but it was kind of difficult to. If you think about it, I mean, every major city in the country has natural wine shops. So New York is a big hub for natural wine as well. So is San Francisco and Los Angeles. A lot of the women I spoke to for this piece simply said that they moved initially to LA just because they enjoyed the weather. So it was an appeal for just, I think, the lifestyle initially. And then going from there, LA, at least in my opinion, has always kind of been an underdog in terms of food and wine. So, major somms were in other cities. They were in New York or San Francisco or Napa or elsewhere. And so LA just became a place where women could try this new thing out and run with it. And so, yeah, from there you build a community, and it just blossomed in the past several years.
Roni, what drew you to LA?
I grew up in New York, and I was always sure that I couldn't live there as an adult, and I don't know anything. When a New Yorkers, I often feel like don't know anything about America. So I was like, where else do you live? Where else do I know people or whatever? And I'd lived abroad, whatever. And I was like, I'm ready to move somewhere else in the States. And I was like, LA, I have got a job potentially, I've got people there. Let's try it,
And you were a somm, you said already when you came here?
Yeah, light, very, very, very baby somm.
Okay. So when folks, and you talked about this a little bit just now, Sydney, but when folks think outside of the state, I think in particular, think of wine in California, my impression at least is they think of Napa, Sonoma, they think of big wines, right? They think of sometimes pretty jammy, sugary, like the Cab being the king grape. How do natural wines fit in that, with the other wines of California?
That's a great question. And I think what I want to really get across to people is that natural wine is everywhere. It's in every major wine region. There are natural wine growers and winemakers in every wine region. So they kind of coexist right now. You can find those big reds, but also in Napa and Sonoma, like there are new and upcoming producers who are producing this different style of wine. So really with whatever you're drinking, you could probably find a natural style of it. And that's a great place to start, is with what you're drinking, what regions, grapes, and just see what's out there.
Mm-hmm. How have consumers react to this, Roni? Like, have their taste changed and adapted? Because I would imagine when these wines were first being introduced, And again, if I'm understanding correctly, one challenge of natural wine is that you avoid adding any sulfur during fermentation, and that can lead to sometimes a little bit of a funky flavor profile that could be off-putting to some people. So how have people's tastes changed from your perspective now as a distributor of these wines?
I'm constantly surprised. I think I'm more, sorry, the light situation behind me is getting a little dramatic. I'm constantly surprised by the consumers and how sort of advanced everybody is at this point. I feel like I'm like, oh, this wine is wild. Everyone is going to think it's crazy, and I'm just like, it's, but I'll just try it. Let's see how it goes. And I'm consistently surprised by sort of how adventurous people have become in terms of, when I first started, this is just history. When I first started, there were definitely moments where people were like, this is disgusting. This isn't wine. But the thing about natural wine that is, I think Sydney pointed out, some of the best examples of from the most traditional wine regions are natural wines,
Mm-hmm.
They're just really well made, and like any wine, like, when a wine is well made, it's going to be delicious. There are flavors. Once you start drinking natural wine, going back to conventional wine is like kind of impossible. I've ruined many palates this way, which I feel very, very pleased with myself about, of just like, you know what I mean? It's going from like eating sort of something that, or drinking something that like tastes like not much, and then going to something that's like vibrant and alive and like feels like full of energy. Not to be, I'm going to just lean into it. It is full of energy and you can feel it. And like, once you sort of start, it's like, there's no going back, because the alternative is just like lifeless. It's not moving. It's not like, there's no, I think also like with alcohol, it's like, it's a complicated thing. It's like, at the end of the day, it's like, it's a drug, and it's like, we're dealing with this complicated substance, and like, there's so much beauty in it, and there's so much history in it, and there's so much like that's transmitted. And with this like gesture in natural wine, you can kind of like feel more. It's like it's a storyteller,
that may have just all been off the cuff, but that was like Virginia Madsen in Sideways worthy, beautiful description of the complexity of wine. So that was really amazing. And I wanted to ask you what excites you so much about this as a specialty, and you maybe you just answered it.
You're catching me on a good day, because yesterday I was like, I am tired of wine, but then I had a couple of, I went to taste some wines last night that were very moving, and so I'm back in it. I care about it again. Just like any job, you're just like, sometimes you're over it. But there are, I was at a restaurant and I picked a wine for some friends to share, and one of them was like saw the bottle and he was like, I can't believe it. Like, I had like such a nice day visiting this person. It's so funny that you did this, because this, it's just like telling these stories about connections. This person's connected to Georgia, which I work with a lot, kind of thing. It's just like, it's a storyteller, and it's like a resin. It's like a piece of resin with a fossil trapped inside, and like, it's just a thing that translates a moment in time, and like is a really beautiful. There are a few things on this planet that are as well-roundedly poetic as this gesture. So we're lucky.
Yeah, that's an amazing description. Sydney, do you see restaurants embracing this trend a lot more? Like, and I'm curious also if there's a demographic breakdown. Like, is there more? Are younger folks more open to this, or are you seeing like that this is something that's becoming just more universally common on wine lists?
I think it is becoming more and more common, and especially here in LA, you're going to find natural wine almost on every wine list these days, which is great. And I think Roni can definitely speak to that, since she's selling these wines to these restaurants. But yeah, in terms of demographics, I would say there is like a younger age group that's really excited about these wines right now. So millennials are definitely drinking natural wine. And then even in terms of city sprawl, I mean, I kind of view natural wine as being based on the east side of LA. And it is kind of becoming more common on the west side in Santa Monica and all these other cities. But yeah, it's focused on a certain community, a certain type of person. And I think it's becoming more common as people find out what it is. And I do at some point want to talk about the funkiness of natural wine, and maybe we can go into that a bit later. But how do you feel about the demographics, Roni?
I think it's kind of, I mean, yeah, definitely it starts like any sort of alternative movement on the left with youth but I think it's, as you said, sort of widespread at this point. There are some wonderful places on the west side and they're busy. Some of our best accounts are on the west side. And not that the west side is obviously there are youth there too, but
it's a different demo. And Roni, like amazingly, like Michael's, which is just an iconic restaurant in Los Angeles for people who don't know it. Michael McCarty started that restaurant in the late 70s, one of the birthplaces really of like what we consider the new California cuisine. And they have a natural wine list now, right?
Yeah, Michael is a special kind of entity. He's a risk taker, and also is like as long as, he's just trying to have fun,
Mm-hmm.
and so he brings people in that are doing, he's always been very good at getting people in who are doing the thing that is relevant in the moment, and so that's how he's kept his restaurant like alive and working. He loves, he's a pretty classic guy, like champagne on ice, every day, but it definitely was a challenge. Some of the clientele, I definitely had to have like full-bodied Pinot Noir, which was really a hard thing for me to, whatever. Anyway, for example, but like, sorry. It was a challenge at moments, but it was also very fun to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good way to talk quickly about the funk factor, Sydney, before I ask both of you, because I want to get this in before we take our questions, like what your go-to wines are. We're heading into the holidays. People are going to want to be taking wines for gifts, so love to get some suggestions from both of you. But the taste factor is a big thing that people are thinking about, Sydney. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know all of the scientific stuff behind it because I'm just the translator from these winemakers. But with the use of less sulfur, there can be more flaws to the wine. So you're going to see certain things like volatile acidity or bread or mousiness, which affect the taste of the wine.
What's mousiness? How do you define that? I don't know that term. I know barnyard, but yeah.
I'm gonna ask Roni to tune in on this and
knew it. Barnyard is basically what Sydney said, Brett, which is Brettanomyces. It's a bacteria, and basically when you taste barnyard, that's what that is. Mousiness is a thing that I don't like to tell people about, because it's like, if you don't know what it is, then it doesn't affect you, and then you can like live peacefully and enjoy the wine. But it is also like, wine. It's a thing that happens. Sometimes it's like from bottle shock if something is too young or was just recently bottled. Sometimes it's a bacterial thing, and it's like a flavor that happens sort of at the end that tastes a little bit like cornflakes or like a little nuttiness or something.
Okay.
And it's like, don't look for it.
No. Okay. Yeah. It's not something you request when you go in to buy. I'm looking for something.
No, don't look for it. And if you, and if you can't taste it, then you're lucky.
Right. Okay. Got it. So what, go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, those are things that, sometimes people are more sensitive to those than others. If you have like a really high or low tolerance, you might perceive it more or less. But those things can appear in the wine because they don't have as much sulfur. They don't last as long as, a wine that's been doused with a bunch of sulfur. It's a fresh product. It's made from grapes.
I I have to disagree, unfortunately.
Oh,
because there
okay.
are some wines that I work with a producer, for example, in Tony Couturi, who's one of the first probably the first natural winemaker in California. And he has never sulfured his wines, and they age so beautifully.
Yeah, yeah.
And many producers that are working in this way that don't sulfur their wines still have wines that age beautifully. So there is a tendency to make fresh young wines. There are also people who are making natural wines without sulfur, who are making wines that are meant to age. So it's I always hesitate in this conversation because it's like because we don't want to pigeonhole.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, no,
And these are generalizations at most. So I guess I've just been thinking a lot about what you were saying before about how do you prepare someone who's never had a natural wine before and don't know what to expect in terms of taste. What would you say to them to help them prepare for whatever they're about to experience in the bottle? Yeah.
Yes.
Roni,
I think
Yeah, you definitely don't want to ask me.
if there's something that, like, when I was working in restaurants, there were wines that were sort of on different scales of wild, and like if there was something, I had a very stressful experience when Jonathan Gold came into Michael's to review the restaurant, which was he ordered a wine that I knew was mousy, which had this flaw it started that within 20 minutes it got there. So I was like, I have to make this decision. What do I do? And I was like, okay, I'm just going to tell him he has to drink this wine in 20 minutes, and this is the kind of thing where it's like, and he took it very well. Obviously he was a very graceful, very generous man. And, but that's the kind of thing where it's like, if there is a wine that is a little bit wild or has the tendency to go in a direction, it's better to be transparent about it, and then people can say, oh, I'm not actually in the mood for that. I'd rather have something that is just fruit or is just this or is just that,
Right.
I think transparency is the most important thing.
No, that's great.
Exactly.
That's really good advice. We're going to call Beth back in so we can share some cues from the audience. But I do want to know, while we're waiting for Beth, like for both of you, and I know this might be a little tricky with you, Roni, as a distributor, but would love to have some really good examples or of some wines. I think someone in the chat put a Zin or a Chard or a Cap. Just like some, which wines are exciting you, or might you recommend people to point people toward?
This is the thing that I will say that there are so many different wines at all different price points. And I think like the most important thing is to develop a relationship with your local natural wine store. And once they get to know, because if you like Zin and you like Chardonnay or Cab, there are 20 other grapes that are comparable, that are probably more affordable even, because they're not these like more highly sought after grapes that could be interesting. And once you get to know if you go into a natural wine store and you tell them you like these things, they'll find something for you that you'll like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're well versed. Yeah,
my community to take care of anybody that walks in the door.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's really good advice. Sydney, do you just have a personal favorite that you really like?
I'm actually in the same boat as Roni, just because there are so many great wines out there, and I try to not hoard too much of one wine. I'm always trying new things, even producers I don't know. So for me, it's like find a natural wine shop that you love. If you really love their selection, sign up for their wine club. A lot of wine shops do ship. So there's a lot of ways to experience these, and the people who work at wine shops are there to help us pick out these wines.
So approach it with an experimental mindset.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. No, that's great advice. All right, Beth, do we have some?
We do.
Questions?
Roni and Sydney, what are your takes on the slow wine guides?
Sydney?
I don't use them. So I feel like I can't really comment on that.
Yeah, I from my understanding, it's mostly based in Europe as like a travel guide. I'm not really sure, but I know about slow food and the little snail that people have in Europe, or maybe it's here too. I think it's cool. It's like anything that gives you a network of information of like like-minded people is useful as like a traveler or as like an experimenter in terms of tasting. So I don't know what's included and what's not included. I think neither of us are particularly familiar with it, but if it is that kind of thing that creates a network, then, wonderful.
James, who asked the question, if you have a link to that, pop it in the comments and we'll check it out. Have you ever tried hybrids, native grapes out west? What's your thinking on their impact on farming?
Jade just throwing in the tough questions. There are, there on the West Coast, the presence of hybrids isn't as common on the West Coast as it is on the East Coast, but there definitely is an increasing presence. And hybrids are an important conversation in natural wine because when we're thinking about sustainability, what's called vinifera, Vitis vinifera, the species of grape that is normally made or has historically been made into wine of a commercial capacity, they're not particularly resistant to climate change or the challenges that will continue to present themselves. So this question is a very complicated one. And on the West Coast, people are starting to have this conversation, but because there is such a culture of vinifera and it's so pervasive, it's not as common a question. I will say, I'm sure that I think there are some other friends who are here that could probably tune in and give some other examples. But anyway, Sydney, any thoughts about that?
Hybrid varieties are an area that I'm really curious about these days. So I have been trying to spend more time on the East Coast, drinking these wines, tasting these wines, learning about what they are. And I think it's going to be a huge component to how we address climate change moving forward. So it's very exciting for us that we can find this way to keep growing grapes with climate change. And that's about as deep as I am right now.
We'll include a link to the story we ran in Alta a few months ago by Heather John Fogarty that talks a bit about climate change and its effect on farming in one country.
Last question for Roni and Sydney and Mary. You're a fancy wine person sometimes. What is on? I realize that in terms of like, if we want to find incredible natural wines at different price points or different kinds of wine to share a connect, like befriend your local natural wine store merchant. But what is on each of your wish list? If Santa or whomever could bring you one bottle of wine or one book about wine, one natural wine related gift, what would it be?
Gosh.
You go first.
In terms of wines, I would say I'm always happy with a bottle of Beaujolais or anything from the Loire Valley. So I love Chenin Blanc and Cabernet Franc, and those are two key regions to hone in on for natural wines. For something a little bit pricier, I mean, I want to dive a bit more into natural Burgundy. I think Burgundy is this very traditional region that people know about. But there are, of course, more and more natural examples coming from that region. And so I want to taste those and just broaden my palate in that area. In terms of books, I'm currently reading You Had Me at Pet Nat by Rachel Signer. It just came out this year. You Had Me at Pet Nat, which is a style of sparkling wine that's made naturally. And that's a memoir about a writer based in New York who basically it shares her journey through becoming a wine writer and meeting her husband who's a winemaker in Australia. So I'm halfway through. It's really good, and I highly recommend it.
Roni?
In terms of wine, I work with a lot of Georgian wines, and sort of if anybody finds any Georgian wine with any age, that would be a nice present for me. If you're looking, just saying.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, this time of year, I'm just generally interested in drinking a lot of champagne, which is, or sparkling wine, but let's be also champagne. Sorry, this light, I know. And there are many wonderful producers working in that region who are doing really great work with farming and great work with natural wine. In terms of books, I'm looking at my bookshelf. There are so many, there's one book that's out of print that's been really useful for me, but that you can find it on sort of like used book websites, that's called History in a Glass. It's kind of it's a bunch of essays all together, but I think it's really beautiful. Anyway, I would say that's I like an obscure sort of older text, just likes to see what has been, not, anyway.
Mary, if we're all coming over to your house for dinner, what would you like? What wine should your guests bring you?
Sydney went right to my heart. I am Team Beaujolais. I love Gamay. Like, so you will never disappoint if you, that's my single favorite wine.
With that, Beaujolais is what everyone needs to bring to their parties this holiday season. I'm just going to give you that little tidbit. I am so grateful to our guests for coming today and for all of you for tuning in. If you were late to the party, again, we will have this conversation up on our website a little bit later today. Next week, this time, Wednesday, December 22nd at 12:30 Pacific, we will welcome expert book buyers from Vroman's Bookstore, Book Passage, and bookshop.org with their ideas for the perfect last-minute gifts for everyone left on your holiday nice list. I am going to ask specifically for like awkward teenage cousin, coworker, Mary, weird uncle. Like, what are the books that we should give all of these people? The person who's read everything ever, a little kid. So we're going to talk about kind of the top picks in each of those categories from really expert people. It's going to be really fun. Please join us for that. Again, thank you so much to Roni and Sydney for joining us, and my wonderful colleague, Mary Melton. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Happy holidays. Stay safe. Take care.
Thanks, Beth. Bye.